Hi guys, and welcome back to a new video. Today I am back with a solved true crime case. Today I'm going to be talking about Sabrina Bebb-Jones' disappearance, and I actually found out about this case through a friend I met on YouTube, and initially I thought it was going to be a very straightforward story, and I ended up deep diving into this, and it's such a fascinating timeline. For this case, I'm going to be going through the events chronologically, so I do apologize, it won't be very suspenseful. It was a very difficult case to put together regarding the timeline, so I'm going to talk through the case basically as it happened. So I do apologize if you like a little bit more of a twist and turn. However, there is a lot of very interesting information at the end of this video as well. That's just the way I had to set up this video. I have about 6 pages of word to go through, so anyway, just wanted to let you know. So I do apologize if it's not as unexpected as you wanted. I would definitely recommend sticking to the end of this video. I will be adding a little note regarding how my friend ended up telling me about this case, but before I get started, please remember to like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference for my channel, and let's just get started on the case. For this case, I'm going to take you back to Colorado in 1997, more specifically the town of Grand Junction. Now, back in 1997, it had just reached the metropolis status, which means it had just reached 100,000 inhabitants, which made it the ideal town to settle down and start a family. One of the families in question was the Bebb-Jones family. Now, Marcus Bebb-Jones was born and raised in the West Midlands in the UK, and in the late 80s made his way to the US on a tourist visa. He initially had a job in manufacturing, but once he lost that job, he found himself having to work as a potato picker for a short while to pay his way and his travels. And while he was illegally traveling and working on a tourist visa, he ended up in Las Vegas, where he met Sabrina. Sabrina was a hotel management graduate, and she actually met Marcus in a hostel in Las Vegas. Now, I'm not quite sure if she was working there or just also traveling like Marcus, but that is where they met, and Marcus was quite known to be a charmer, to be quite good at chatting ladies up, and she immediately fell for him. The couple got married in 1993 and moved to Colorado Grand Junction, where they bought the rundown Melrose Hotel in hopes of renovating it and turning it into a brand new attraction. A year later, in 1994, they had their first son and their only child, Daniel. The Melrose Hotel was actually a hostel at the time, and all 18 rooms needed to be fully renovated and restored. It was a huge project. Sabrina was extremely involved with the hotel. She was absolutely in love with this place, and she worked really hard to bring it back to a fully functional hotel. Most of the staff were British girls who were here on a work travel visa, most likely to save a little bit of money on employees while giving them experience. And it is quite well known that Marcus was a little bit of a flirter. He was constantly chatting up the girls who were working there, and it was also known that he would oftentimes chat up the visitors who came for a tour of the hotel. Employees saw Sabrina get jealous quite often, and they would very often argue in front of employees, though it would never turn into an actual fight. But Sabrina would get quite frustrated with Marcus' behavior. Because the hotel took so much time and energy from Sabrina and Marcus, they needed a solution for Daniel. Now, Daniel would go to daycare during the day, and one of the daycare staff members was Michelle. And Sabrina really trusted Michelle. She got to know her better over time, and she would often ask Michelle if she could watch Daniel after hours. So bring Daniel back to her house. She also had a young daughter, and they liked to play together. So Michelle would end up looking after Daniel after daycare, sometimes evenings and sometimes on weekends, just so that the couple could have more time working on the hotel without worrying about a child running around. Over time, Michelle got very attached to Daniel. She spent quite a lot of time with him, and she also got to know Sabrina very well. And she always said that Sabrina was very close to Daniel. She always had Daniel on her mind. If she was running 5-10 minutes late to pick Daniel up from daycare, she would always phone up, let Michelle or any other member of staff know that she was on her way, and to please let Daniel know that she would be there soon, even though Daniel probably had no concept of time. He probably didn't even know it was time to get picked up. But she always wanted to make sure everyone knew where she was and that she was on her way and that Daniel was her first priority. Early September 1997, Michelle received a very unexpected call from Sabrina. Sabrina asked Michelle if she could watch Daniel after daycare on Tuesday the 16th. She explained that she and Marcus were headed to Dinosaur National Park that day, and they needed the full day and a little bit of the evening to themselves. And before Michelle could say yes or no, Sabrina really begged her, "Please, just do this for me, we really need this day off." Of course, Michelle agreed, and when Sabrina dropped Daniel off in the morning, she quickly went over his needs and when she would be back to pick him up, and pretty much rushed off. She was quite in a rush to get out of there, drop him off, and just get their day started. Tuesday went according to plan. Daniel went to daycare, and after daycare, Michelle took him home and she fed him, but she noticed that Sabrina never called during the day, which was very unusual because Sabrina would always check on Daniel and make sure everything was okay. However, she knew Sabrina was at a national park and it wasn't that easy to get signal. She was also busy. She needed this day off. Maybe this was a one-off that she wasn't going to keep tabs on Daniel. She knew that Daniel was in trusted hands. However, when it came time to pick Daniel up, the time they had arranged together, nobody showed up, which was extremely out of character for Sabrina because Sabrina would always phone if she was running late, and Michelle heard nothing. 45 minutes after the scheduled pickup time, Marcus showed up. Sabrina was nowhere to be seen, but Michelle didn't think too much of it, only because they had had a long day, and at this point she was just relieved that someone was coming for Daniel. But Marcus showed up, gave her the money, and just left. Didn't mention anything, just picked his kid up, though Michelle did notice it was a bit unusual only because she had never seen Marcus pick Daniel up on his own. The only time he would be involved in dropping Daniel off at daycare or picking him up from daycare or from Michelle's house was if Sabrina was also there. So definitely unexpected, but she didn't really question it much. She had work the next day at the daycare again, so she handed Daniel over to Marcus. That was the end of the day, and the next day when she went to daycare, Daniel was there. However, Marcus dropped him off again, and it was only Marcus who dropped him off. And that was very unusual as well, especially because he showed up late, and Daniel was extremely upset and restless throughout the day. And although Michelle was no longer in charge of Daniel's class at daycare, she still caught a glimpse of him and noticed this very unusual situation. So where was Sabrina? Why wasn't Sabrina picking Daniel up from Michelle's, and why didn't she drop him off at daycare the next day? Now, it could be that she was just very tired. However, Tuesday night, when Marcus came back from picking Daniel up from Michelle's house, he told his employees that Sabrina and him had gotten in a fight and she had just stormed off and left. He said that on their way back from the Dinosaur National Park, they stopped at a mall for fajitas, had a fight about her jealousy, and she just left Grand Junction and never looked back. And he still didn't know where she was, but he told employees to start phoning around local hotels in the area, anyone in the area that might have seen her. So employees started phoning around just to get a little bit more information, hoping that someone would call in or that Sabrina would walk through the door at any minute. One employee said that Marcus told them not to phone police and report Sabrina as missing, most likely because he thought she would just walk back at any minute. And police weren't alerted of Sabrina's disappearance until Thursday, when a Melrose employee finally filed a missing person report. Thursday was the day that Michelle had called in sick at daycare. Either she or her daughter were sick that day, so she couldn't come into work. And she received a call around midday asking her if she had seen any of the Bebb-Jones family, because the entire family had gone missing. So police immediately got in touch with her because she had been watching Daniel on Tuesday and she had seen Sabrina last, as well as Marcus, but she had seen Sabrina that morning. Maybe she had more information. So the police questioned her and she explained her point of view. So how she thought it was very odd that Marcus was the one to pick up Daniel, and that the next day it was also Marcus dropping him off at daycare. Now, although Sabrina was definitely missing, Marcus had actually told his employees on Thursday morning that he was going to head to Las Vegas with his son to look for Sabrina. She had friends and family there. That's where they originally met. So he assumed that if she were to take off, that she would go somewhere familiar, somewhere where she had a support group. Maybe she stormed off to go back home. So he loaded the van and just grabbed his son and left. Nobody heard from the family until a few days later, when a hotel maid found 3-year-old Daniel crying, naked from the waist down and alone in a hotel room. Daniel had been abandoned for about 48 hours, and it didn't take long for police to locate Marcus in a separate hotel room with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the jaw. He had left a suicide note addressed to Sabrina that said, "Sabrina, initially you may not think this is the best. I can't change who I am. I understand your anger, but now as the years pass, that will diminish. This is the only way I can be without you or Daniel. Please don't hate me. Marcus." However, he did survive the suicide attempt. And while he was recovering, police tried to find out what had happened in the days leading up to the suicide attempt and why was Daniel abandoned on his own in a hotel room for so long. Police quickly found out that instead of looking for Sabrina, Marcus had gone on a 3-day bender. This bender involved cocaine, hard drugs, orgies, designer clothing shopping, gambling, as well as renting a Ferrari. He had maxed out all of Sabrina's credit cards. He spent up to £4,000, and when he tried to spend another £4,500, he got declined. After his suicide attempt, Marcus was obviously briefly placed in a psychiatric hospital for surveillance just to make sure that he wasn't about to take his life again. And police started questioning him, but when they tried to find out a little bit more about Sabrina and where she was and what he was up to for the last 3 days, Marcus seemed way more interested in speaking to a lawyer. He didn't look concerned about Sabrina's whereabouts. He was just trying to get to talk to a lawyer, which isn't completely insane. I think most people should probably go that route instead of trying to help police. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to get a lawyer to represent you in a situation like this. However, maybe you look a little bit more concerned about where your wife is, especially if this is something you are choosing to end your life over. That's just one thought. That's just my little 2 cents there for free. Marcus told police that the reason he had gone on a 3-day bender was because he couldn't live without Sabrina. He knew he was going to kill himself and he wanted to just go out in style. Which is definitely a cliche thing to do, I guess. If you know you're gonna end your life, then that's probably the type of 3-day bender most people would go on. However, everything seemed a little bit off to police. They searched the van that he drove to Dinosaur National Park with, and also to Las Vegas with, and they found traces of blood that belonged to Sabrina in the back of the van. However, Sabrina was missing. There was no proof that she had been injured or that she was dead or that she had been murdered, anything like that. All it meant is that her blood was in the back of a van that she often used, so it wasn't enough evidence to do anything suspicious for sure, but blood in the van is just blood in the van. That's all it means. It just means that at some point her blood ended up in that van, and that's it. They also found quite a lot of thistle flowers under the van. However, he had driven all the way to a Dinosaur National Park and to Las Vegas. It's a desert area. He's bound to pick up some flora along the way. So that didn't mean anything. But that's all the police found in the van, and it was definitely not enough to do anything with. A few days after having shot himself on September 22nd, a friend came to visit Marcus while he was in the hospital, just to check on him. And when the friend asked Marcus where Sabrina was, Marcus just said, "Oh, she'll show up. She'll just show up. Don't worry." I'm sorry, I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's actually just absolutely mind-blowing that you went on a 3-day bender because you think your wife is gone forever. She's left you and she's not coming back, and you're going to take your own life over, or you're going to try to take your own life over this. And then a few days later, a friend's like, "Where's your wife?" He's like, "Don't worry, she's going to show up anytime now." How does that make sense? I don't know what he was thinking at that point, but I found that comment so bizarre. Anyway. Now back in Grand Junction, Michelle heard all about Marcus's last few days and his little bender adventure, as well as Daniel being left alone in a hotel room. Sabrina was still missing, and Michelle knew immediately that Marcus had something to do with this. She knew for a fact that Sabrina would never just storm off on her own just like that without a bag or a backpack. I think most women know that it's just not something you do. You don't just leave a place like that on your own without a plan, especially because Sabrina only ever carried a little wallet and cash in her pockets. She never really had a purse with her. So Michelle said that it is very unlikely for Sabrina to just storm off with no backup just like that. And bear in mind, this is 1997, so even if she had left, it was very unclear where the mall was in regards to Grand Junction. So I don't know if Sabrina stormed off in Grand Junction or at the mall near the highway. Either way, it's not like she can just, this is a Tuesday night, right? She can't just hop on a bus or get an Uber out of this place. Like, this is not a time where you can easily bounce out of there. So Michelle knew it was just so impossible that someone would just hitchhike their way to Las Vegas or wherever. And also, Sabrina loved Daniel. She would never leave her son behind. She was obsessed with her son, and she loved the hotel she was working on. She had everything to lose by leaving. She would never, ever leave Daniel behind. So nothing was adding up, and Michelle knew Marcus has something to do with this. However, there was no evidence. There was nothing to prove that Marcus had been involved with Sabrina's disappearance. Michelle was very upset with how little coverage Sabrina's disappearance got, and she strongly believes that it's because of her Vietnamese heritage. She knows that other people who went missing near that area around that time got so much more coverage than Sabrina ever did. There were no missing posters, there was absolutely nothing on TV about this, and Michelle tried her best to keep the search alive, but she was just one young woman trying to do God's work in a small town, and unfortunately, there wasn't much she could do. Police did initially try and search for Sabrina and look for Sabrina. However, they quickly realized that between Grand Junction, Dinosaur National Park, and Las Vegas, that was a huge, huge area to cover. Where would you even begin? It didn't last very long. They didn't look for her very long, so they just kind of dropped the whole case, and it quickly went cold. Sabrina's parents and family quickly started a custody battle to get full custody of Daniel. However, because Sabrina was only reported missing, she was neither found nor declared dead, so they had very little weight. They had very little to go with, and Marcus ended up getting full custody of Daniel, even though he abandoned him for 48 hours alone in a hotel room. To me, just screams that you should never be in charge of a child ever again, even if it's your own child. I'm very disappointed that Sabrina's family didn't get full custody of Daniel. However, Marcus got full custody and quickly sent him back to England to live with his mother, Pamela Weaver, who raised Daniel to believe that Sabrina died in a car crash. Which is an interesting choice, because maybe a child can't really understand that mom is missing and nobody knows where she is, but a very interesting choice to explain to your child that your mom died in a car crash. Pamela Weaver is an interesting character, but we'll talk more about that later. Within a year of Sabrina's disappearance, Marcus sold the hotel that Sabrina had spent so much time and energy restoring and kept half of the proceeds. The other half went to Sabrina's estate, and with the proceeds, he lived in Vegas for about 2 years. He was often seen gambling and spending his time with strippers. Once he ran out of money, he moved back to Kidderminster in the UK, where his mother also lived, and left no forwarding address to the police. It was 1999 when Marcus moved back to Kidderminster. Daniel was still living with his grandmother in the same town, and Marcus began earning a living on the British poker circuit. He would spend all of his daytime hours on gambling websites, and after dark he would join a poker club called Dusk Till Dawn. His neighbor said that he was a very polite but arrogant man with very unpredictable hours. He told everyone he was working in IT and that he would often go to China on business, when really he seemed to be spending quite a lot of time holidaying in Thailand. And one of his poker player friends from that Dusk Till Dawn club said that Marcus always kept his temper, whether he won big or lost big. A lot of poker players have very big egos and big personalities, and big mood swings, especially when there's so much money involved. So if you win big, you're gonna go wild, and if you lose big, you're gonna go wild. Marcus always seemed to keep his cool regardless of the outcome, and his friend said he was a really nice gentleman, a real pleasure. So he seemed to have fully readjusted to living his life in the UK, and people seemed to like him overall. In the Grosvenor, I don't know if I'm saying that right. In the Grosvenor Grand Prix of 2007, Marcus Bebb-Jones won £90,000, which for a single poker tournament is quite big. Although his finances are a little bit murky, over his poker career it is believed that he has made over £250,000, which means very little because that's just what he won. We're not talking about a net profit here, because he must have also lost quite a lot of money in poker, which is what I suspect, because even though he was a poker player winning sums like £90,000, he was still living on benefits. While Marcus is having the time of his life playing poker and not raising his son, something else is going on in the States, in Colorado. On October 2nd, 2004, a rancher called Jay Yunt was rounding up cattle in the meadows below Douglas Pass when a sun-bleached skull caught his eye. Jay knew just enough about animals and cattle to know that this was no animal skull, and that it was in fact a human skull. And he was smart enough to put a little ribbon on the location where the skull was found, and he brought this skull back to police to have it tested. After 7 years without any leads or information on Sabrina's whereabouts, police in Colorado had finally located the remains of Sabrina Bebb-Jones. The skull had been exposed to so many elements over the years, but there was still a very evident gunshot wound that is believed to be the cause of death. She was quickly identified through her dental records, and the thistle flowers that were found under the van Marcus had been driving at the time were a match to the thistle flowers found where her skull had been left. It seemed like there was now enough evidence to bring Marcus to justice and make him face the consequences of Sabrina's murder. Months and months went by and nothing happened, and it was extremely frustrating, especially for Michelle back home, who assumed that now that there's all this evidence, all they have to do is begin the extradition process. But the thing is, in the UK, nobody knew about Marcus's past. They had no reason to know that his wife had gone missing. I'm not quite sure what story he told people. He probably didn't even tell people he was married, but they had no idea about Marcus's past in the States. And it wasn't until he won that tournament in 2007, where he won £90,000, that he brought attention back to himself, because up until then he was living pretty much anonymously in the UK. Nobody really knew where he lived because he didn't tell police where he was moving back to in the UK, and it was 1999, like the early 2000s anyway. So it wasn't until he won that tournament and there was a picture posted online that the UK poker world started to find out a bit more about the investigation going on in Colorado. After an extensive investigation in 2009, police were able to start a 4-year-long legal battle. Marcus Bebb-Jones finally got arrested at his mother's house in Kidderminster, and he initially fought the extradition process, but in 2011, a judge overturned it and he was sent to the US to face trial. The only reason Marcus could be extradited to the US was that he wouldn't be eligible for a death sentence or the death penalty. So he was brought back to the States on one condition, that he would be spared the death penalty. He initially claimed he was innocent, though he did end up reaching a plea deal with the prosecutors, and he admitted to having killed Sabrina in the heat of passion before heading to Las Vegas for a 3-day bender and ending his own life. He admitted to second-degree murder charges and got sentenced to 20 years in jail, minus the 1,000 or so days he had already spent in jail up until that point. Back in England, Grandmother of the Year Pamela Weaver still believes her son is innocent, and she told the Daily Mail that she believes Sabrina was living a double life and that someone else killed her. How can you be living a double life? And I don't know if she's saying she thinks Sabrina's still alive and living a double life somewhere else, or if she's saying she had a double life and someone else killed her from that other life. But anyway, she believes Sabrina was living a double life and that someone else killed her. My head is all over the place, she said. I wouldn't say he was set up. It's just that the police didn't look for anybody else. Like, why would you look for anybody else? Because he did it. The basis of the prosecution was hearsay. There's no evidence. The whole thing is like living in a novel. And it's quite funny because when I was typing up, and like that's the quote she gave to the Daily Mail, and I was typing that up, in my notes, all I wrote next to it was thoughts in parentheses. And my thoughts are, whatever, Pamela, whatever you're on, like I'll have some of that, because I understand it must be really hard to admit that your son murdered his wife. That can't be easy, but don't you have questions? Like, I think she's just decided to live in a world where she believes somehow Sabrina is not the victim. Sabrina's the one who made this happen. She had a double life. Someone else killed her, and now her son's paying for this. And the fact that she says this whole thing is like living in a novel. It is. You're living in your own head like this. I'm just gonna stop here because I feel like if she watches this video, she's gonna find me. But yeah, then again, I expect nothing less from someone who told her grandson that his mom died in a car crash. It's just really frustrating to hear her talk about this. I think she should have sat this one out. But anyway, investigators believe that in 1997, Sabrina requested a divorce and Marcus couldn't face losing his child and half of the hotel. So they ended up having an argument, and one way or another, he ended up killing Sabrina. I'm not quite sure how Marcus could argue that it was in the heat of passion when she seemed to have died from a gunshot wound. Surely you would need to have a gun on you. And I'm not quite sure why you would bring a gun to Dinosaur National Park, especially back in 97. But they believe that he killed her either in Dinosaur National Park or near that area and just left her body there, or it's possible that she was killed elsewhere and transported to this remote location in that area. I don't think anyone believes she was murdered at the hotel or the hostel because people were staying there. People were living there and working there. It would just be absolutely insane. So I do believe they just got in the van that day and started driving to Dinosaur National Park. Whether it was planned or not, I'm not sure. Though I think Marcus and Sabrina already had a rocky relationship, so I do think they were one fight away from divorce, though they never got to that stage because Marcus murdered Sabrina. In court, Marcus did address Sabrina's family and said, "In the blink of an eye, everything changed, and I'm sorry. We all lost so much, and I want to say sorry for Sabrina. I'm so very sorry." A difficult concept to believe because he did murder her and then went on a 3-day bender, abandoning his son as well. Now, the bender can make sense. I guess it's hard to tell if he was really partying and then pretended to kill himself, intentionally aimed poorly that he would survive the gunshot wound. Though I think that's you have to be very confident that the shot isn't going to kill you. I think he probably was quite distraught after murdering Sabrina, as most people probably would be. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did end up just losing it, going on a bender and trying to kill himself. However, it's very hard for me to believe that he feels sorry about this because he just went on and lived his life in the UK playing poker, having a great time. It's just... So that's it for the actual case of Sabrina's murder. However, I have a few extra things I didn't expect to read regarding this case. Now, regarding Daniel grew up with his grandmother, and just a reminder, he is a victim in all of this. Obviously, he has done absolutely nothing wrong. But between 2008 and 2011, Daniel was a victim of cyberbullying by Peter Gordon, who was a man in his mid-20s. Now, Peter Gordon comes from East Lothian, which is where I live, so how insane is that? But Peter Gordon lived all the way in Scotland, and he initially became friends with Marcus over the internet, and Peter Gordon had a bit of a past. I think he saw his dad waste away with MS, and he's gone through some abuse. So it is said that Peter Gordon saw Marcus as a father figure, though he didn't know anything about Marcus when he started talking to him and opening up to him over the internet. Once Peter found out about the investigation and who Marcus really was, Peter decided the next thing to do, and the right thing to do, was to hack into Marcus's email and send emails to Daniel, Marcus's son, with titles such as "Your dad is a scumbag," "Marcus beaten to a pulp in jail," and "Murder accused could face death penalty," which would have been so distressing for a teenage boy, especially if it's an email coming from your dad's email address. But he also used different email addresses, but he did hack into Marcus's email. And Daniel absolutely did not deserve this. Like, Daniel has no parents left. Sabrina is dead, unfortunately, and his dad is in jail all the way in the States. I didn't manage to find out if Peter Gordon served any time for this cyberbullying, though he did apologize. And Daniel did state, "He is the scumbag, not my dad. He is the one causing all the misery and upset, and I hate him for it." Which, you know, let's maybe not start comparing murder to cyberbullying. I'm not saying what Peter Gordon did was right. It absolutely wasn't. But I believe Daniel also believes his dad is innocent. I think he's on Team Pam with this one. But Peter Gordon was absolutely wrong to cyberbully him, and Daniel had gone through enough, to be honest. But on June 18th, 2017, 23-year-old Daniel Bebb-Jones left his house to go to the Kidderminster Town Centre, armed with 2 throwing knives, a hunting knife, an axe, as well as a fake suicide vest loaded with nails and screws. All the nearby homes were evacuated immediately. A bomb disposal team was sent, and anti-terrorism officers searched through his house. When he failed to surrender to police, they tasered and arrested him, and 3 days later, he pleaded guilty and was charged with 3 counts of possessing a bladed article in a public place and sentenced to 18 months in jail. It's still unclear why Daniel did this. Police don't believe this was linked to terrorism at all, but I'm not sure what his aim was or what his thought process was. And I'm not saying that's to be demeaning in any way, but it does seem clear that he needs some sort of help, mostly because of what he's gone through between his mom and his dad, and also this guy cyberbullying him online. He must have gone through hell and back. So if anything, this, to me, an unprofessional opinion, looks like a cry for help. And although I'm not upset that he got 18 months in jail, obviously you still need to pay for what you've done, but I genuinely hope he gets the help he needs, because it seems like he needs help. On another unrelated note, let's talk about the Melrose Hotel and the fact that it is allegedly haunted. Now, the Melrose Hotel is still up and running. It is still a functional hotel, and they seem to be doing monthly haunted historic tours of the hotel. They were even featured on the Travel Channel with Ghost Adventures, one of those paranormal shows where they go stay overnight and try and film any paranormal activity. It is considered to be one of the most haunted places in western Colorado. There's quite a lot of information online about this, and it is said that there are ghosts in the hotel that seem to specifically target men. The owner of the hotel, the current owner of the hotel, says that there's evidence that there had been satanic rituals in the basement or in one of the rooms. And a member of staff has allegedly been possessed by one of the spirits in this hotel. Now here's a fun fact. Like, I know the true crime community seems to be very like crystal astrology and paranormal loving, which is absolutely fine. If that's what you like, then go ahead. However, I'll let you know, personally, I have like zero time for haunted hotels that go on TV shows. Like, that's just my, I'm not telling you what to do with your life, but that's just my take on it. I have very little time for this type of stuff. But I will talk about this because I actually have beef with this. Now, the Ghost Adventures show that the hotel was featured on says that the vicious entities seem to only target men and may have even been responsible for a brutal murder involving the hotel's previous owners. How offensive is that? First of all, Sabrina is not believed to have been murdered inside the hotel at all. At no point is anyone suspecting that. The fact that you're going to remove the responsibility from Marcus to some paranormal activity that could be responsible for Sabrina's murder is infuriating, and it's just so messed up. Like, I can't imagine being her family, seeing the description for this hotel. I didn't obviously watch the episode. I'm not interested. Also, I couldn't find it. I found that very frustrating. I didn't like that at all. And whether it is haunted or not, that's not for me to decide. I genuinely do not care. But this hotel is clearly, allegedly possessed, or like staff members are being possessed, or there's ghosts, or doors are rattling and all that jazz. Now, the thing to remember is that the Melrose Hotel is still a functional hotel. You can find it on TripAdvisor. And one of the descriptions for the hotel is like a relaxed atmosphere. Pick a lane. You can't have a haunted hotel with doors rattling, ghosts waking up in your sleep, members of staff being possessed, and then turn around and be like, you guys should totally spend the weekend at the Melrose Hotel. It's real chill. You're gonna have to pick one and monetize one of them, but you can't have both. It does not make any amount of sense. It actually drives me insane. I'm gonna talk about something else, but anyway. For those of you who are into haunted stuff, I'm sorry if I've offended you. This hotel is said to be one of the most haunted hotels in Western Colorado. Check it out if you want to. Let me know if you see anything. The last and final and craziest part, obviously, if you've made it this far, thank you. This is a very long video. I wasn't sure if I should have done 2 parts, probably. But as I've said in the beginning of this video, this is a case that was brought to my attention through a friend I met on YouTube. She did not want to be named. I'm not making this up, so I will keep her anonymous. But the reason she mentioned this case to me was because a few weeks ago, she received a package from, I believe, the Grand Junction area, and she recognized that name because she had actually been traveling there in 1997, and she had been to the Melrose Hotel, which back then was actually a hostel. And she looked up the name because she remembered she had actually spent time with Marcus Bebb-Jones. He would do day trips out of his van, so he would take visitors and customers who were staying at the hotel out on day trips in the van. And she actually knew Marcus Bebb-Jones. She had seen Sabrina around the hotel. And while looking into the dates some more, she found out that the day she left the hotel, because she kept a journal of this, was the Tuesday 16th, the day people believe he murdered Sabrina, which is such an insane coincidence, such a crazy timeline. I don't know how anyone could process finding out that the very day you left that hostel and you knew the owner, at least one of the owners, that very day he went on to murder his wife is just absolutely wild. I do have a picture she shared with me about him on one of the day trips. That's as much information as she's willing to share, but I thought it was just absolutely insane. And also, I do want to thank her for bringing this case to my attention because it was extremely interesting to research. It took me quite a while, but that's just, yeah, that's something I'm never going to get over. So I can't even imagine how she's dealing with this. I hope you're okay. But I thought I would include this into the video, but thank you so much for bringing this case to my attention. This is it for today's video, guys. I hope you liked it. Please remember to like and subscribe. Please let me know if you have any questions down below, if any comments, any cases you'd like me to cover, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.